then bringing that interpretation and connecting them together. This is something we've been thinking about. Is this something, y'all as an organization would want to participate in? And, it felt like a natural evolution for us organizationally. Those are all things we do. We do land preservation. We do a lot of on-site interpretation. We have a huge digital footprint through the website and our social media channels. And so the chance to really kind of package that into one big project and really potentially make a huge impact in, getting more people out to these sites and telling the story and giving us a chance to learn and, hopefully take this to other places. That was really attractive to us.
Yeah, and I think it's great timing with the 250th coming up, right? I think there will be an interest in it. I know it'll be an interest here in Virginia, but like I said, South Carolina is really leading the way on this, and I applaud you and Doug for making that happen. Because looking at the map you all have on your website, how many sites is it again? It's a lot.
Yeah, so I think depending on how you measure it, somewhere over 200 battles and skirmishes in South Carolina. And so really the local historians, archaeologists, the people in South Carolina had been spending a lot of time studying and trying to kind of narrow that down to, we know we can't do everything. So but what can we do to still create a really meaningful experience? And so 70 is about the target number long-term. So which is quite ambitious, but we're starting with a group of 30 sites where we want to get that piece off the ground. And that's a combination of, even then kind of breaking it down a little bit, you're still accounting for some sites that are already parks, the National Park Service sites, the state parks, some local parks. And then there are ones that we really are kind of building up from the ground. And then there are also about half of those 30 sites are just going to be roadside pull-off areas. We're still looking for a kind of catchy name for it. So if anyone on here has a fun idea of what to call them beyond roadside pull-offs, we're definitely taking nominations, but, places where either the development is such that you just can't do a large preservation park, or, it just, is a situation where you maybe can't buy the land, but you still want to tell the story and still link that in.
Right. And just maybe get the easements along the road there where you can have a place to pull off. And
Exactly.
Now, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, you mentioned a website. So where is the website? So if people want to find out about this trail.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's it's www.thelibertytrail.org. And it's also hosted on the American Battlefield Trust website. So if you go to our website and search Liberty Trail, you'll find it on there. But it is, let me just say it one more time to make sure I say it for everyone. So it's thelibertytrail.org is where you can find it online.
And in this trail, now you mentioned, some different things, state parks, national parks, pull-offs. This is a physical trail that people can actually go and visit different sites, but they can, I guess, get a map from the website or something like that of this.
Yeah, so what the current website is, as I said, hosted on the American Battlefield Trust website. We do envision building out a more robust site over time that really has greater opportunities for trip planning and itinerary building. So the website we have now is informational, but it's not the full kind of ultimate website that would accompany this tour. But to your question, so it is envisioned as a driving trail where we would have a mobile app that would help you, connect you between the sites, deliver content between the sites, and serve as that tour guide, getting you from place to place and when you're on site. But then we also want to have those really, interesting and engaging on-site experiences. So, the larger battlefield parks, they'll have the trails, they'll have the interpretation on site. We're really looking into some cool ideas about audio experiences on site and how we deliver that content and really bring you into the personal experiences of the participants and the people in the surrounding area, and just make this a unique experience for visitors.
And I think also, hopefully, and you all do this all the time, but hopefully, the more you promote these sites and their stories, hopefully people are like, oh, maybe I should preserve this, right?
Yes.
I do think a lot of people don't understand that, maybe a piece of their property where something happened like this is important. And then once they go, oh, it's kind of important, they'd be more willing to either put under easement or, there's different preservation tools there. But I think as you highlight the stories, especially with the anniversary coming up, and then people may become a little bit more in tune with preservation, then doesn't mean they weren't into preservation before. They just didn't think what they had was all that important, Mark and I we went to Camden 2 years ago now, Mark. I think it was 2 years ago. We drove and did the Hanging Rock, Waxhaws, Camden, went down to Charleston, and you go out the backcountry there, and it's pretty rural area. So, I'm sure those tourism offices and stuff out there in those counties probably are looking at you all going, we hope that people are going to come out and maybe stop at the grocery store, or stop at the restaurant and get something to eat, or stay at a hotel,
Well, and I'm glad y'all are looking too, in addition, to interpret, the areas where, even at the exact moment there, it might be built up or whatever. Because one of the things that, for having lived in Charleston and worked down there, it was, parts of downtown are all built up, but it's still a battlefield. So finding ways to tell those stories, even in urban or developed areas, is kind of cool. So,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely a broad, it's very diverse. If you're including not just the Camden campaign or specific campaigns, you're kind of including a bunch of things. So you're going from Charleston out to Columbia, out to the west, backcountry. So it's definitely a good broad selection of the area.
And it's interesting too, you mentioned the anniversary, because obviously the first major engagement in 1776 was at Fort, you can see behind me, on Sullivan's Island. But a lot of people don't realize, how many of the state symbols, the palmetto tree and the blue flag and all that kind of stuff, come out of this engagement. But hopefully, there's a lot of interest and excitement building up to the 250th of that. And then, a lot of this, the fighting that happens in the backcountry comes later in the 1780s, but hopefully it'll gear up a lot of excitement for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as preservation projects, I asked you before we jumped on live to talk about just, focus was Liberty Trail, but I definitely want to talk about what you all are doing as far as preserving lots of early American River War sites. So real quick, before we jump out of South Carolina, you mentioned it a little bit, but give us some of the victories you all had in South Carolina because, I know there've been many, but talk a little bit about those victories you had there for preservation along the Liberty Trail.
So we've preserved over 600 acres since we got started on this, and that's been at sites, includes Waxhaws, which really there was just a small county park there before, and so we've been able to preserve 50 acres of the battlefield. So that was a big one early on, as well as several properties at Hanging Rock. We preserved about a little under 200 acres at Hanging Rock. A large transaction we did was at Camden, adding 300 acres to the battlefield there. We preserved properties at Utah Springs, which that one's a really exciting one for us because, in a lot of ways it feels like Utah Springs personifies some elements of the Southern campaigns. And, you have this really important battle, this major battle, but, it's just not something that gets the attention of a Saratoga or a Yorktown or, some of the other battles in the Northeast. And so, we think there's a real opportunity there to bring that story to life. And there's some really, really great individual stories to share from that battle. And then a really interesting transaction that the South Carolina Battleground Trust spearheaded, but we participated in was the preservation of Fort Fairlawn, which is an extant British fortification down in Berkeley County. And so that's a really cool site. It's tucked back behind a neighborhood. You wouldn't know it's there. But we are going to build a battlefield park around it, and people will be able to, I've been inside the fort. It's really cool. On the land preservation side, those have been some of our big focuses. And now we're really focused in on this park creation side. So we're working really closely with our partners in the Camden community, historic Camden, Kershaw County, the city of Camden. They're building a great new Revolutionary War Visitor Center right next to the historic Camden campus, which is going to be just a real asset for that community and for visitors, with targeting a spring 2021 opening. And we've been focused on doing a small exhibit within that visitor center that then is, you know, essentially designed to encourage people to go take the drive out to the battlefield and do that experience in connection with stopping at the visitor center. So that's been another big one. And then also at Cowpens, and I think they actually may have some limited hours now. We've been working on the creation of a new Southern Campaigns animated map, like the ones you'd find on our website for other battles and campaigns. And it's going to be showing at the Cowpens Visitor Center and the 96 Visitor Center. So that's another exciting project we've been working on.
Yeah, we were down in Camden a couple of years ago, and they were just getting ready to release the schematics for the drawing for the new museum visitor center. So, and the land the trust has a big chunk of land there at Camden, and
yeah,
that's the work that the Camden folks have done to recreate the longleaf pine preserve.
Yes.
I mean, I've been down there maybe 4 or 5 times, and every time I go down, I see a big difference between when I first went down and now. You stand down there now, they've got so many different volunteer groups and paid groups who've done a lot of cleaning underneath those trees and opened up those view sheds. And now it's like completely different. You can see how open it was at that time. There's no underbrush. So they've done some great work, and they're probably great partners of yours. And so I know you guys do an education program with them every fall when they have their big living history events. So because we have a lot of people who watch us, and they always give us a hard time for doing too much northern stuff. So this is our 3rd Southern campaign in the
right.
done. So
it's not South Carolina, but we also worked with the Kettle Creek folks, Kettle Creek Battlefield Association in Georgia. So I'll give them a plug for all the great work they're doing to preserve that site and really make it a great destination in that part of Georgia too. So
yeah, and somebody who's watching, one of our friends, Vanessa Smiley, said,
oh, hi
Vanessa. Yeah, she gave you a shout out for Kettle Creek. So
all right, good.
But let's move a little bit further north and just kind of give us an update on what projects you all are working on, and I know some things you guys are working on that's not public yet, so you can't talk about those, but you guys are always doing stuff.
Yeah.
So share some of the ones you have in the hopper right now.
Yeah, so 2 of the big ones we have going on right now, we have a large transaction at Brandywine, again, working with partner organizations there on a preservation effort, and then Bennington. So those are the 2 that are really kind of the most active and preservation projects that we're getting close to doing. We're actively fundraising on both of those, and just excited about the prospects there. We've done a few projects at Brandywine in the past, but Bennington's another new site for us to get to know. So those are 2 big ones we have going on.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of talking with Mark earlier about just the broad breadth of places you guys are involved in, and we know that the focus has always been Civil War, and we know Civil War probably gathers more of the attention, but you all went from the Campaign 76 side and now going into kind of reaching out everywhere across the whole the whole spectrum. I do want to say before we keep going that, and some people have noticed, and Catherine, I don't think you knew this, we weren't even live the first 10 minutes of that conversation.
Oh, no.
Yeah, right. Don't leave historians in charge of technology, but we are recording it, so we can repost. We're live now, though, because I was like, no one's commenting. And then Mark texts me and goes, you're not live. I'm like, oh, it's on me. It's my fault.
Do you want me to kind of give my 1-minute Liberty Trail overview?
Yeah, that'd be great. I know it seems silly, but it's like, I also want to tell people who are watching that you missed the very beginning when I said Doug Bostic from the South Carolina Battlefield Preservation Trust could not make it tonight. So if you tuned in and listened to Doug, good reason to do so. We have Catherine, who's just as good and excellent. But if you don't see Doug, it's because he just couldn't make it last second. Something came up. So, but so Catherine, if you can kind of repeat a little bit about what the American Battlefield Trust Liberty Trail is.
Sure. Well, I get a second chance at it. So yes. We'll compare the 2, make sure I keep my story straight. And I will say that, I'm coming from the American Battlefield Trust as, the land preservationist here. Doug is both a land preservationist and a great historian and storyteller. So hopefully y'all have a chance to to connect with him on another night, because he's really a great advocate and a great person to share this vision. But so the American Battlefield Trust, we have been working with the South Carolina Battleground Trust now for several years. It started because, you know, we are at our heart a land preservation organization. And when we expanded our work into the Revolutionary War, we started making new connections with partner organizations. And so from there, we started working with Doug and the South Carolina Battleground Trust and lots of other great partners in South Carolina. And, you know, there had been a vision in South Carolina for trying to create a network of battlefield sites connected together, and really shine a light on this story and bring attention to this really critical chapter of American history that just doesn't get sometimes that same level of attention. And so the idea with the Liberty Trail is to preserve the battlefields that have not been previously preserved, connect those with all the existing battlefield parks, the National Park Service sites at Cowpens, Kings Mountain, 96, and then down at Fort Moultrie, and then bring in state parks, local parks, and create a real destination using digital resources like a mobile app to bring those sites together, weave those narratives together, and really create not just a history experience, but, you know, tell you where to go eat lunch. And, you know, if you want to go on a hike in the afternoon, or you might want to go stop by an antique shop, you know, really make it something that enables the visitor to have that complete experience.
And
go ahead, Mark.
I think that preservation is so vitally important too, because, you know, you mentioned, you know, some of these national parks like Cowpens or Kings Mountain or Guilford Courthouse. I feel like, you know, those kind of stand out more so in the popular narrative than, let's say, a Camden, because, you know, the land wasn't turned into a national park or whatever. So I think that, and it's also interesting, you know, and it's kind of like when I was living and working in Charleston, the revolutionary story, you know, at least with the siege of Charleston in 1780, wasn't really told really at all. And I wonder also how much of this also has to do with winning and losing, in the sense that Camden was such a utter defeat for the American side. Same thing with Charleston, that, you know, in the years following, people didn't want to highlight these stories. But then ultimately, when you think about it, you know, people are still sacrificing and fighting, and they played important roles in the story. So I think it's neat that now we have an opportunity to go back, find out these stories, and then work to preserve the land. So the next generation, there will be parity among all these different battlefields to tell a better story. So
absolutely.
I'm looking at our questions here. One question we had is probably we have lots of archaeologists that watch us. So how much do you think, archaeology has played a role? And Mark, I know you're an archaeologist too, so you can chime in here too if you like, but how much has archaeology played a role in identifying some of these sites? I know about some of the archaeology done at Camden, a couple years ago, which is pretty cool stuff, but how much is archaeology being used to help identify some of these places? Since, you're talking about 30 now, but 70, which is, a lot of places. I'm sure some of these places, are either newly discovered or being reinterpreted because of archaeology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just what you said, when you start with some of these well-established sites, the National Park Service sites and some state park sites, that has been identified pretty well. But as you move out into that larger group of 70, it's amazing how much there's still to learn about a lot of these battlefield sites, and really figuring out the full story. And archaeology is a big piece of that. And through the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology with Doug Bostic and his team of archaeologists at the South Carolina Battleground Trust, there's some really interesting work being done. There was a big project recently to identify the Tar Bluff battlefield, and they actually were able to identify the site of John Lawrence's death.
Right.
And so that's, all this time later, you're able to make this really big discovery. Another project where archaeology is playing a big role is a project we're doing right there at Marion Square in Charleston, where really the siege lines, there's understanding where they are, but there wasn't, full confirmation of their location there in Marion Square. And so we're going to work on a project that starts by identifying their location, so you're sure that they can be protected. For those of you who know Marion Square, it's a really active center in downtown Charleston. You know, they're having the farmers market there and food and wine festivals, and you know, it's a real center of activity. And so making sure that the footprint is appropriately identified. And then from there, actually right now, there's a rendering being developed that actually shows what that hornwork looked like. And then from that, we're going to use that to build AR that people can use on site and really see, okay, what did this 40 or 30-foot tabby wall look like? You know, I see this one little piece here in Marion Square, but what is it really, what was this landscape like? What was this place like during the Revolution? And we think that AR is going to be a really cool tool to use there, along with traditional interpretation. We want to add signage, and you know, make sure that visitors to that place understand the significance of the role of Charleston in the Revolution, because as you were saying, I think that's just often really overlooked.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds awesome. I think it's you know, it sounds similar, you know, another New York City is obviously a major battleground as well that people probably just live their lives on and don't realize what happened. But yeah, when I was first, you know, 10 years ago, just reading about the siege and, you know, different sorties and bayonet charges and firings and all this kind of action going on, it's like, well, where is it? You know, when you overlay it on the map, it's like, oh, you know, where I go to the bar on Friday night, you're actually right on the ground where this actually happened. So, and yeah, whereas, you know, it'd be great to see a reclamation project to just kind of turn the whole thing back into battlefield. I don't know how realistic that is, but finding new innovative ways to try and tell people what happened on, because you know, you're still on the same ground, even though it's been built up, and even though there's buildings and concrete and all sorts of stuff, you're still at the same location where it happened. So that sounds like a really neat project to be able to try and envision, you know, because it's hard sometimes standing, you know, next to a restaurant and a bar and saying, well, this is where, you know, there was a fort or whatever, and it's
right.
So that's kind of neat. I'm very excited. I'm definitely want to follow that. And I did read about the John Lawrence, finding the location of John Lawrence, because I think, you know, a lot of people also probably just discovered his story from the Hamilton play. That John Lawrence, you know, was such a youthful, such energetic, and such a passionate part of the early American story, and his life was tragically cut short. And I remember when we were down there, Rob, we were trying to find out where that was. And I remember it was difficult. And I think there were some generalities. And I think that's where the archaeology is so awesome, that, you know, you can find musket balls and be able to say, like, you know, we know it was right here, you know, not in this, you know, with somewhere in this area. It's like, no, it was right here. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think that combination of Hamilton and archaeology, you know, if you want to take two things that people think are really cool and put them together, that one generated some good interest for us. So
yeah, we did, and we went and visited their grave sites in Mempkin Abbey, which is, you know, I guess northeast of or northwest of Charleston, but it was pretty cool to be able to be at the spot where they're buried. Whatever, but I think, yeah, you're just being able to tell so many more stories that way. So,
well, Mark, you were talking about, and she mentioned the interpretation in Charleston. You know, you had a little role play in a small marker, right? There in Charleston.
Oh yeah. So yeah. You mentioned Marion Square. So there's a little state historic marker down there. Yeah, often swallowed up by the farmers market or whatever. But it's that was a little project I did in 2010. Because after hearing about, you know, all the stuff happening, and you know, and I worked with some of the local heritage groups, Sons and Daughters of the American Revolution, to raise the money, and then worked with the State Department of Archives and History to but, you know, I mean, it's just amazing how difficult some of these things, because then you have to go through the city of Charleston, you have to go through a lot of different agencies, but was able to kind of like navigate all that stuff. And the square itself is it's privately owned. It's the Washington Light Infantry that owns the square, so get approval from them. But we were able to get the marker up there just because a lot of people do see, when you go down Marion Square, you'll see a little piece of the Tabby fort that's there, and all it says is, you know, remnant of the Siege of Charleston line 1780, and, you know, there is no other interpretation. So at least now there's a little state historic marker that gives a very brief, in just a couple hundred words, that this is a site of a major surrender of an American army in the South. It was a crushing blow, but ultimately, it was the first domino in what would eventually lead to Yorktown. So, so if anybody goes down to Charleston, South Carolina, you're in Marion Square, you can check out the historic marker there.
Mark's role in interpreting South Carolina.
important stuff.
I'm sitting here reading questions. Sorry.
Sure.
I'm gonna put you both on the spot here really quick, and Catherine may not.
Mark go first then.
No. All right, Catherine. So Catherine might not answer it because she's got so many partners she's working with. Mark, of all the sites in South Carolina, American Revolutionary War story, what do you think is the one that's probably most overlooked that you think is the most interesting?
Oh man, most overlooked and
most a site that most people don't know to go visit, right? Like, I'm not going to say you can't say Cowpens, you can't say
but more people.
But it's a national park, so people kind of know Cowpens exist.
Okay, well,
what about some of the other smaller sites?
I mean, I mentioned Charleston downtown is a battlefield that people don't realize, but a neat little site that a lot of people don't realize. You might go to Fort Moultrie to go see where the battle of Fort Sullivan happened, but what a lot of people don't realize is that the battle there on Sullivan's Island is actually a two-pronged attack, and that there was an attempt to take it with the naval ships that was repulsed. But there's also an attempt to come across on the northern side of the island. There's a little area called Breach Inlet that separates Sullivan's Isle from Isle of Palms. And it's probably more famous for, again, the Civil War. It was one of the locations where the Hunley went out in 1864. But during this battle in 1776, Sir Henry Clinton and a bunch of British soldiers attempted to try and cross and try and take the American fort by land. And there's a small detachment of American soldiers up there on the northern end that held them off. And so there's firing and action that happened up there. And it was forgotten for very long. And then when I was down in Charleston, there was a local guy there, Doug McIntyre, who worked to get local historians and stuff to build a little, park, just exactly what you're talking about. And they called it Danger Thompson Park, who was the guy who led the troops there. And so you can go there today, and there's 3 or 4 little interpretive markers that tell you that important story. But it's just exactly what Catherine was saying. How many people are going to the national park and getting their passport stamp and visiting a national park? How many of them are going to take the extra 3 miles to go take a look at this little site? And hopefully it's like, trail ideas like this that will, let people know that, hey, the battlefield was bigger than just this, 2 acres that's now National Park Service. So that's my little overlooked, but definitely check it out. It's very small, but it's very cool. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, Catherine, what do you think?
Well, first, we are planning on including that spot. That is one of our Liberty Trail spots, so we will definitely link it up. So I like your answer. I think I'll go with one that I alluded to a little bit earlier, with Utah Springs. Not a battlefield that I was familiar with, despite the fact that I'm from South Carolina and grew up, probably about an hour and a half away from there. And that one, to me, there is a fair amount of development. It is not a full open space battlefield like others. But that one, to me, has such great stories. And it's still a really interesting place to go, because despite the fact that there is development when you get closer to the main battlefield, that approach route where the Americans were coming, that road is still the historic roadbed. It's a dirt road. So there's a place where you're on it, and, it really could be 1780. And you can have that experience leading up to getting to the battlefield that just feels, like a real connection to that point in the past. And then just the combination of participants there, the different Continentals, the militia, they're just all these really interesting stories of, the people who were participants at that fight. And, I think a interesting tidbit that I've learned about Utah Springs is that actually in the 1930s, there was a law passed to make Utah Springs a national park. And so it actually remained on the books, but just due to circumstances, There was a hydroelectric lake being built there, and that put it on hold. And then you just got into a period of American history where, you know, some of these parks just weren't moving forward as much. And then it just kind of got forgotten. And, you know, I know a lot of people thought it was under the lake. And so the fact that no, you know, most of the battlefield is actually still there, and there's this huge story to tell, and there is an opportunity to do it. That one just always really appealed to me. And there's a really amazing barbecue spot about 5 minutes from the battlefield called Sweatman's Barbecue. If you go, try to eat at Sweatman's, and the Liberty Trail app will tell you about eating at Sweatman's, I promise, but I'll give you all that sneak preview.
That's great. Yeah, you guys need to include barbecue spots, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Call that, 100-mile barbecue, because it's like 50 miles to drive out there from Charleston. Yes. Back, but, you know.
Yeah, Utah Springs is pretty cool because one of our colleagues, near W. Burt Dunkley, wrote a book about it a few years ago, and talked about how, you know, they originally thought everything was underneath the lake, underneath the reservoir, but now they've actually understand that most of it's still there, which changes how it's being interpreted, right? So it's not just a history story, but it's also like a preservation story, and how, you know, history research is still very relevant, right? We're still learning new things about these events that took place 200 years ago. And, you know, also, I think Utah Springs gets forgotten because it's so close to Yorktown, right? I was in Yorktown today, and it's like, you know, today's the day they're negotiating the surrender, the anniversary of. Utah Springs is, you know, September 8th. So it's, you know, people kind of forget about Greene and South Carolina fighting this battle, while, you know, the main action of Yorktown, which wasn't decided by September, but when you think about, you know, memory and studying the American Revolution, Yorktown obviously is one of those places. Almost, you know, they know Lexington and Concord. They knew Bunker Hill. They may know Trenton, Mark, maybe Trenton, right? They know Valley Forge.
No, they just know the crossing of the Delaware.
Right. They know Valley Forge, but they really should know Morristown. We won't get into that. And then they Yorktown, right? They just kind of skip over everything else from like Trenton, Valley Forge to Yorktown. But that's a good
maybe Saratoga. I feel like occasionally that one maybe.
Yeah, Saratoga pops up occasionally.
You know.
But you know,
Utah Springs.
I'm always impressed if anyone knows what Utah Springs is. Like, oh, you are a history buff. So, but
well, Utah Springs is so incredibly bloody too. I mean, like the casualties were like incredibly high for a Revolutionary War battle.
Right.
And yeah, no, it's interesting. My wife, who used to work at Congressional Cemetery here in Washington, D.C., a lot of Southern veterans of the Revolutionary War are buried in that cemetery. And yeah, many of them, you know, on their records was that they were at Utah Springs. But yeah, you know, obviously for the Revolutionary generation, that meant something important that, you know, hopefully we can get people to know about that now. So
my other interesting Utah Springs anecdote that people don't always know is, I guess, with a lot of the Maryland troops there fighting at Utah Springs, and when they went back to Baltimore, you have Camden Yards, which isn't Utah Springs, but then you have Utah Street, right, which is what leads up to Camden Yards. And so, you know, I don't think that's a connection that the average person is putting together, but it's a pretty interesting one.
It's true. Yeah. And, you know, the call-up connection there with Camden too, being in command of the Maryland troops.
Well, and John Eager Howard, he had his manor or whatever. I think he named it after, I don't know if it was named after Utah or...
I think it maybe was another house. Is it Belvedere? Is that what it's called? It's another place, and it was something in South Carolina.
Yeah.
Something near Utah Springs, maybe.
So Mark, before we wrap up here, I'm looking at questions. Best book to read on the Southern Campaign? I'm tossing it to you. I have an idea. Oh, where'd he go? Mark disappeared.
Right here. This is a good one. I like this. Southern Strategy, Britain's Conquest of South Carolina and Georgia, 1775-1780, which I really like. It doesn't go into some of these other battles that happen after Charleston, but it does have, it's great because it gives a short synopsis of the battle, gives you a good idea of the historiography of the different engagements, gives you an order of battle, gives you the casualties, kind of everything, and it has good maps too. So I would recommend that. And then also for Charleston, I know Carl Borick, who's the director of the Charleston Museum, he wrote a good book on, well, he has two good books, one on the Siege of Charleston called The Gallant Defense, and then one about the prisoners of war that were put on prison ships in Charleston Harbor after the war, or during the war towards the end, which was a pretty sad story, and one that I think that's another overlooked story is if you go up to New York, there's actually a big monument to the prison ship martyrs, because over the course of the war, over 12,000 Americans die on British prisoner of war ships, which is pretty amazing that they suffered so greatly. And especially like in Charleston, the British were routinely coming onto the prison ships saying, hey, you can get rid of all this suffering and pain. You just have to join the British Army. And some of them do take it, but the guys who don't take it, what is their motivation, other than a belief in what they were fighting for? And a lot of them sacrificed. And a lot of them died in Charleston Harbor, hundreds of them. There's no marker, no memorial, nothing to denote their sacrifice. So, but Bork has a good book about that as well. So I would recommend, those are 3 good Southern campaign books I'd recommend.
I actually have one sitting on my sofa too, so I can answer one.
Yeah.
I like the Road to Guilford
Yes.
House. It's definitely more kind of, told in that storytelling narrative kind of way. And if you've ever had the chance to meet Jack Buchanan, he's just a really, really interesting, nice man. So I know there's a follow-up to The Road to Charleston, but
right,
I like that one. So
yeah, a few of our watchers here, our good friend Mike Peters, Mike has more history books than anybody I know, said Road to Guilford. So I'm glad you said that, because it is a really good book. All right, last 2 questions from my list here.
Wait, what's your
She took it. Road to Guilford. That book is great.
The only one sitting on my sofa, so
the book is great. It is. It's excellent. It's a good overview. I like Devil's Whipping, Cowpens, but as far as the whole Southern campaign, I think
Devil Whipping is, I think, a great single battle study of Cowpens, and I think
using archaeology too.
The archaeology, it pulls in that part of it of being able to tie what happened to the land. So I want to make sure.
Right. Yeah, she took mine, so I didn't have one. All right, 2 more questions, and we'll let Catherine go here. So somebody asked about the John Lawrence site. Do you know if there's any opportunity in the future for public access to that site?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
at least not in any time in the near term.
Right. Okay, that's what we thought. And the last question is, as far as Liberty Trail goes, I know you have different stages of when you plan on things happening. What's your goal to have those 3 sites either marked with signage or have a mobile app, or like to have your initial interpretation? What's the time frame for that?
Yeah, so we're really about to start hitting the physical ground a lot more here in the next month or 2. And by spring of 2021, we're looking at starting to bring some new sites kind of online / to life in real life. So with our focus work at Camden, we're getting started on work at Blackstocks. We're going to be working at Fort Farallon. So, I see 2021 as a big year of activity within the Liberty Trail. And as we really move into this implementation phase a lot more, I think some of those timelines will become clearer, but next year we're going to definitely have places to go. You can visit, content on the web, and really start building out the destination.
Great, because Mark and I drove a lot of this a couple of years ago, and we knew where we were going, but most people would not. Hanging Rock in itself, it's hard to find the little monument, and the monument's not even really on the battlefield for that. So,
exactly.
Wayfinding is key. So,
absolutely.
Well, hey, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, you're welcome. The last thing I was just going to say just about the project, I think one of the amazing things about the project is the level of support at the state and local level. So, the American Battlefield Trust is working on this, but it is, absolutely something that the success is based on the enthusiasm there in South Carolina, from the folks of the National Park Service in South Carolina to the state park system to a lot of different local parks and partners. And it's their passion and enthusiasm for telling this story and preserving this land and bringing this story to life that's really making this project what it is. And so we're just grateful to partner with everybody.
I know they're excited down there too, working with Charles Baxley at Camden and some others. They're very excited about the attention, so it's well deserved. Well, again, thank you for joining Mark and I. Sorry we couldn't have Doug on board tonight, but we'll catch him in a future time. But thank you for all the work that you do. I work a lot with you all for Civil War sites and where I work professionally, and you guys are top notch. And
no, I appreciate the opportunity for being able to talk with y'all.
So before we sign off here, I just want to remind everyone who's watching, our next ERW Happy Hour Revelry is next Sunday. And we'll be talking to Christian McBurney, who has a new book on Charles Lee, a very controversial figure in Rev War history. And we'll be talking to Christian about his new book on not just Lee's wartime experience, but also his court-martial after the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse. So join us next Sunday for that. Everyone be safe. Have a great week, rest of the weekend, and see everyone next Sunday. And thank you again, Catherine.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.